This is GARIS, Masculist, MGTOW flyers, that is 2-3 page essays on the themes of masculism and MGTOW, written by and read aloud by Prof. Dr. Hugo de Garis. This is flyer number 347, entitled "The Monoconscious Biconscious Controversy Will Split the Feminist Movement." Description. This flyer claims that as more feminists become biconscious, there will be a bitter split within the feminist movement, as the biconscious feminists complain to the monoconscious feminists that the latter are killing off the feminist movement due to most young women siding with the biconscious feminists, because these young women want to have relationships with men so that young men can help them pay for them to have babies. Men reject monoconscious, misandrist, male-dumping feminazi bitches. Monoconscious feminazis often use feminism as a crutch to rationalize their anger at men who reject them for being fat for feminazis. Fire itself. Bigger. The monoconscious biconscious controversy will split the feminist movement, by Prof. Dr. Hugo de Garis. Email profhugodegaris@yahoo.com. Website profhugodegaris.wordpress.com. This flyer predicts that the controversy over whether feminists should be monoconscious or biconscious will become so bitter in the coming years that it will split the feminist movement, which may fatally destroy it. This flyer anticipates that as feminists become increasingly conscious of masculist ideas, a lot of them will become biconscious, that is, aware of both feminist ideas and masculist ideas, that is, aware that men oppress women, as talked about by the feminists, and that women oppress men, as talked about by the masculists. Biconscious feminists will argue that those feminists who remain monoconscious will be destroying the feminist movement, discrediting it due to society seeing these monoconscious feminists increasingly as bigots, as callous sadists who don't give a shit about men's gender plight, at the female oppression of men. Young women will be strongly influenced by biconscious feminists because young women want to be able to have a relationship with a man who will help her pay for the cost of having a kid or two. Young women are very conscious that it is virtually impossible to be both a real female careerist with a demanding career in terms of time and mental energy and be a mother of small children at the same time. Such a dual role is so demanding that most such supermoms burn out in their 40s, exhausted by the stresses of juggling two balls at the same time. So these young women really want to have a young man who will support them, so they don't want to be seen by men as being monoconscious feminazi bitches, whom men are increasingly rejecting as they become better informed of masculist ideas and masculist attitudes towards fluffies, that's traditional women who expect to be able to parasite off the money of a man, and fluffy feminist hypocrites in the divorce courts. Most young women will become aware of the case presented by the masculists that women oppress men more than vice versa, because they will be persuaded by the masculists and the media who shows society how fluffies man-slave men, financially sexploiting them, robbing them of their freedom, committing gender crimes against men that last for decades, etc. These young women will agree that men have a gender case too, that's TWO. And since biconscious women are much nicer to men in comparison to monoconscious, misandrist, male-dumping, feminazi bitches, biconscious feminists are much more likely to have boyfriends, since biconscious feminists tend to lose their gender bias, their anger bias, due to having had both their feminist and their masculist consciousnesses raised, so that their feminist anger at men for the ways that men oppress women is more or less cancelled by their female masculist anger at women for the ways that women oppress men. Such biconscious young women will be much more open to the obvious and simple statement of the masculist that, quote, "If you want to have a man, you have to be nice to him. Otherwise, he will dump you. He will walk away." This simple lesson is much more difficult to absorb for a monoconscious angry feminist who has had a lifetime of conditioning that men are the enemy, who need to be despised. So not surprisingly, such monoconscious feminists tend to be manless, since men don't want relationships with monoconscious feminazi bitches. Way too many monoconscious feminists are fat fours, that is, they are usually overweight, and many are obese, so that they are sexually repulsive to men who reject them, so that these monoconscious feminists turn into real feminazi bitches, out to make men's lives miserable by constantly dumping on them, treating them as the inferior sex, toxic males, and the like. Such fat-four feminists will feel very threatened psychologically when they see millions of young women becoming biconscious feminists. Many fat-four feminazis, triple Fs, use feminist misandry as a form of revenge against men, as a psychological crutch to rationalize in their own minds their female attitudes towards men who reject such women for being sexually repulsive due to their lack of prettiness and their obesity. Even if such women become biconscious, they will still be rejected by men for being fat fours, so such women will be strongly tempted to remain monoconscious feminazi misandrists, because they'll be motivated to lash out at the men who reject them as a form of ego defense for being rejected by men. Such misandrist male-dumping fat-four feminists will then be seen by biconscious feminists who bother to keep themselves slim and sexually attractive, and who were born pretty, or at least average, that is 5 out of 10 in looks, as bigots, as mean-spirited, who refuse to accept the perfectly reasonable claims of the masculists, who are raging about the massive gender injustices committed against men in the divorce courts, the blatant sexual discrimination against men in the form of no paternity rejection right, given that women have a maternity rejection right, etc. Monoconscious feminists will be seen increasingly by society as callous bigots who are destroying the feminist movement by making it so misandrist that most women, and certainly most young women who have yet to have babies, will distance themselves from monoconscious feminism, seeing it as alienating and unacceptable to them, as too misandrist and extreme. Those biconscious feminists who are active in the feminist movement, who for example are third wave feminists, who want to increase the level of women's power in society, will become increasingly conscious that their monoconscious feminist colleagues are causing their feminist movement to be rejected by a large majority of young women, thus causing the feminist movement as a whole to slowly die. Other monoconscious feminists who are not fat and ugly may still remain monoconscious for personality reasons, that is, they are just conservative by nature, not able to quickly adapt to the growing biconsciousness of young women, who have in the eyes of the masculists been brainwashed all their lives to believe that gender oppression is a one-way street, that is, that only women suffer gender oppression, that the idea that women oppress men more than vice versa, as the masculists say, is a sick joke to such feminists, to be derided. Not everyone scores highly on the openness to experience tests that serve as creativity tests by the clinical psychologists. Those biconscious feminists who still want to promote the empowerment of women will be encouraged to hear from the masculists that masculists encourage women to fip up, that the fipping of women is a basic political goal of the masculists, seen as a prerequisite for men to be able to liberate themselves from the hated man-slavery of fluffy parasites who expect to live off a man's money. Masculists are thus male second-wave feminists. The more far-sighted masculists can see that it is in men's self-interest that women fip up, take responsibility for their own lives, bother to get a career-competent education, and become fips as adults, pulling their own weight, asserting their true female power and competence, and thus earn a good wage or salary so that they do not parasite off the money and labour of a man. However, masculists are opposed to the monoconscious feminazi push for equal outcomes for women, that is, the imposition of legal quotas in favour of women, and hence in disfavour of men. If 50-50 quotas are imposed on the sex ratio for positions of power and influence, then that will discriminate against men, since thanks to women's hypergamy, brackets, that is the female instinct to mate up, that is choosing to mate with superior men for their superior DNA for their kids, so that the kids have superior DNA than their mothers, which is good for the species, so evolved, close brackets. Men are genetically superior to men at the top end of the performance scale. So that should be superior to women. Since women have been sexually selecting men for 1,000,000 years, who were taller, bigger, stronger, fiercer and smarter than women, then of course today men are taller, bigger, stronger, fiercer and smarter than women on average. Hence the patriarchy, that is the general male dominance of the positions of power, prestige and privilege. The other major cause of the patriarchy is the phenomenon of GMV, greater male variance, due probably to men having only one X chromosome in their cells, so that a greater variety of genes get expressed in men than in women, so that men's scores on anything measurable are more spread out, while women's are more bunched up, resulting in men being both the morons and the genii. With men the genii, it's to be expected that men have won 99% of the science Nobel Prizes, that men have an average IQ that is 4 points higher than women's average IQ, that women have 10% smaller brains, lower testosterone levels, much lower achievement track records, etc. So, given men's greater genetically based ability over women, if 50-50 quotas are imposed by the feminists, then the masculists will scream blue murder, because such women quotas will discriminate against men. Because given women's genetic inferiority, with quotas, the bottom scoring of the women who get a slot will be less capable than the top scoring of the men who do not get a slot. Not only is this discrimination against men, it's also bad for society because it rejects the principle that the top positions should go to the top people. With feminist quotas, that is, equality of outcomes rather than equality of opportunities, society will be less efficient than with equality of opportunities, where people are promoted both purely on merit and not on their gender. Masculists have nothing against equality of opportunities for women. If a woman is genetically capable, then she should be able to rise to the limits of her genetically determined capacities. Masculists support this, but are hotly opposed to equality of outcomes, that is, women quotas, due to their discrimination against men, who are the genetically superior sex at the top end of the performance scales. These biconscious, non-feminazi bitchy women will welcome this masculine support for equality of opportunities for women, and many of them will agree with the argument of the masculists that equality of outcomes is sexual discrimination against men. However, a monoconscious, conservative, non-open-minded, traditional feminazi will reject masculine's opposition to equality of outcomes and come into ideological conflict with the biconscious feminists. For several reasons given above, that is, young women wanting to have young men to help support them to have babies, so accept biconsciousness, so as not to be seen as misandrist feminazis, as well as society seeing increasingly monoconscious feminists as callous bigots, and the acceptance of the masculists of equality of opportunities in the empowerment of women, will cause biconscious women to increasingly become frustrated with the limitations and narrowness of viewpoint of the monoconscious feminists. Over time, this rift will widen and deepen as the biconscious feminists claim that the monoconscious conservatives are destroying the feminist movement, causing it to be rejected by an ever-increasing proportion of young women and by society as a whole. This rift, I predict, will become so strong in time that the feminist movement will split as the two sides hurl insults at each other. The monoconscious feminazis will see the biconscious feminists as traitors to their own sex, selling out to men, taking the soft option to keep the approval of men so that they can have a man help pay for them to have babies. The biconscious feminists will see the monoconscious feminists as killing feminism, as being narrow-minded, callous bigots who fail to see that men have a gender case too, who agree with the masculist claim that women oppress men worse than vice versa, so that responsible women have a moral obligation to fip up and not be fluffies. Biconscious feminists will be female masculists, as well as feminists, pushing for the empowerment of women, but not at the expense of men, pushing for more equal opportunities for women, but not for equal outcomes for women. As masculist ideas spread throughout the culture, as more and more masculists give talks to the public, rouse the interest of the journalists, TV producers, write their masculist books, etc., then more and more women will become biconscious. The more women who become biconscious feminists, the greater is the likelihood that there will be a rift, a split, in the feminist movement, as the two sides, monoconscious and biconscious feminists, learn that there are real and passionate differences in their two outlooks, their two ideologies. Cheers. Prof. Dr. Hugo de Garis. Email profhugodegaris@yahoo.com. Website profhugodegaris.wordpress.com. Brackets. Contains links to 350 odd YouTube, Minds, BitChute, Masculist essays/videos, and to the freely downloadable book, Masculism, Men's Rebellion Against Being Manslaves to Women, an e-textbook of 350 plus masculist flyers for men's studies courses. Ciao.